Hi there, Jennifer here. Thanks for joining me today as we continue our series on the Trinity Stitch. The Trinity Stitch is a beautiful textured cluster stitch that creates a dense reversible fabric resembling tiny stars or flowers. It gets its name from the single crochet 3-together stitch that is used to create each cluster. This stitch is especially well suited for blankets, pillows, and dishcloths, as well as cozy cold weather accessories like this hooded scarf and mittens. I'll leave links to these patterns and more in the description below. In my last video, I showed you 2 methods for working Trinity Stitch in rows, along with tips for keeping your stitches aligned. In this video, I'll walk you through how to crochet Trinity Stitch in turned rounds. Alignment is as important when working in the round as it is in rows, so we'll cover stitch placement here as well, along with how to check your work as you go. Before we begin, it's worth mentioning that the Trinity Stitch can be worked in the round in more than one way, either in turned rounds or continuous rounds. Different designers use different approaches, and the finished fabric will look slightly different depending which method you use. With my samples here, this one was worked in continuous rounds, and this one was worked with turned rounds. You can see how the texture changes depending on the method, especially with stitch alignment, and whether the fabric is reversible or intended to be viewed from the right side only. For my Trinity Stitch pattern collection, I use turned rounds because they create a fabric that closely matches Trinity Stitch worked in rows. This allows for a consistent look across projects. So for example, if you're making both the Trinity scarf and mittens, the stitch pattern will have the same overall appearance. Now that you know why I've chosen this method for my patterns, let's take a closer look at how to work Trinity Stitch in turned rounds. Let's begin with round 1. When working in the round, the Trinity Stitch pattern is worked over a multiple of 2 stitches, so you can chain any even number of chains. I'll chain 30. So I'll make a slip knot, place it on my hook, and then I'll just chain 30. I've got my chain 30 here, and now I'll bring the first chain that we made up to meet the last chain that I made. So we're going to form a ring. Before we join those, just make sure that there's no twist to your chain. You want to make sure that all the V's are facing straight up and nothing's twisted. As long as it looks like that, you're good to go. And we'll insert our hook in the first chain that we made, yarn over and draw through, and then draw through the loop on your hook to complete that slip stitch join. So now we have our ring. Before we continue, I'm going to pull this loop out a little bit and remove my hook, and I'm going to place a stitch marker in, I'll just put it in the back loop of the slip stitch that we just made, because that'll be important when we get to the end of our round. And I should also mention while we're here that just as there's different ways to work Trinity Stitch in the round, I've seen a few different methods for handling the transition at the beginning and end of each round. In this tutorial, I'll be showing the method that I use in my own patterns. We'll be starting each round with a single crochet. So with that in mind, we're going to chain 1, and we're going to single crochet in the first chain there, the one that we joined to. Okay, and now we're ready to make our first Trinity Stitch. So this stitch is worked across 3 consecutive stitches. We're going to work into the same chain as the last stitch we made, the next chain, and the next chain. So I'll insert my hook in the same chain as the last single crochet we made, yarn over and pull up a loop, insert my hook into the next chain, yarn over and pull up a loop, insert my hook into the next chain, yarn over and pull up a loop. I have 4 loops on my hook. I'm going to yarn over and draw through all 4. And that completes our first single crochet 3 together. And then I'll chain 1 to complete our first Trinity Stitch. Let's do that again. So now we're going to work our next Trinity Stitch across this chain, which is the same chain as the last leg of the last single crochet 3 together that we worked, into the next chain, and into the next chain. So all 3 of those. Insert your hook into the last chain that we worked into, yarn over and pull up a loop. Insert your hook into the next chain, yarn over and pull up a loop. Insert your hook into the next chain, yarn over and pull up a loop. So again, you have 4 loops on your hook, yarn over and draw through all 4. And then chain 1. I'll do that one more time, a little bit quicker. And you'll just continue working that sequence all the way around until you get to the point where there's just 1 chain left at the end of the round, and I'll meet you there. When you get to the end of the round, you'll have 1 chain left. We're going to work this last single crochet 3 together across the last chain that we worked into, the last chain, and that marked slip stitch from the beginning of our round. I'll go ahead and insert my hook in the last chain that we worked into, yarn over and draw through, insert my hook in the last chain, yarn over and draw through, and then I can remove my stitch marker and insert my hook in the back loop of that slip stitch, yarn over and draw through. I have 4 loops on my hook, yarn over and draw through all 4 loops to complete that last single crochet 3 together. No need to chain 1 after making this last single crochet 3 together. I'll explain why in a minute, but for now you can go ahead and slip stitch in the first single crochet of the round to join here at the end of your round. And then just like before, I'm going to pull out my loop a little bit and remove my hook and grab that stitch marker again, and I'll place that stitch marker in the slip stitch that I just made here at the end of the round. This stitch marker will help identify where to work the first single crochet in the next round. Then we'll move that marker up with each new round. And that's round 1 complete. At the end of the round, you should have the same number of stitches as the number of chains you made at the start of the round. I'm not really going to differentiate between stitches and chains here. I'm just going to count them all as stitches. But because I chained 30 at the beginning of the round, I just want to make sure that I have 30. And I do. Let's move on to round 2. Turn your work at the end of round 1 and then chain 1 to begin round 2. Next, I'm going to work a single crochet in the joining slip stitch that we marked at the end of the last round. In fact, it may help to remove your stitch marker and put it aside. We'll need it again at the end of the round. I'll insert my hook in that joining slip stitch, yarn over and draw through, then yarn over and draw through both loops on my hook to complete that first single crochet. Now, I admit working into the joining slip stitch is a little bit odd, but I've learned through all of these patterns that I've been designing that it does help maintain the alignment of the stitch pattern from round to round, and it creates a smooth transition between rounds. I'll share a stitch chart here to help illustrate what I mean. The joining slip stitch is in red, as well as this first single crochet is in red in the stitch chart. Because the Trinity Stitch pattern alternates chains and single crochet 3 together clusters, the beginning single crochet takes the place of the chain between the first and last cluster of the round, completing the stitch pattern repeat. For this reason, we won't work a chain after the beginning single crochet or before joining to it at the end of the round. Let's make the first single crochet 3 together of the round. We'll insert our hook into that same joining slip stitch that we used for our first single crochet. Insert my hook in there, yarn over and draw through. I'll insert my hook into the next stitch, yarn over and draw through. And then I'll insert my hook into the next chain, yarn over and draw through. I have 4 loops on my hook. I'll yarn over and draw through all 4. And that completes our first single crochet 3 together of the round. And then I'll chain 1 to complete the Trinity stitch. We'll work our next single crochet 3 together, working across the last chain that we worked into, the next stitch, and the next chain. Insert my hook in that last chain we worked into, yarn over and draw through, insert my hook into the next stitch, yarn over and draw through, insert my hook into the next chain, yarn over and draw through. 4 loops on my hook, I'll yarn over and draw through all 4 of them, and then chain 1. Now you'll want to make these chains rather loose, on the looser side, because we'll be working into them in the next round. I'll do this again one more time. You can go ahead and continue working in that sequence all the way around, and I'll meet you at the end. I've reached the end of the round, and I just have 3 more stitches to work into. I'll insert my hook in the last chain that we worked into with the last leg of our last single crochet 3 together, yarn over and pull through, insert my hook into that next stitch, yarn over and pull through, and insert my hook into this single crochet from the start of our round. Yarn over and pull through. I have 4 loops on my hook. I'll yarn over and pull through all 4 loops. Just like at the end of round 1, we won't chain after making this last single crochet 3 together. Instead, we'll just work a slip stitch to join to that first single crochet of our round. And then just like at the end of round 1, we can go ahead and pick up our stitch marker again and place it on that joining slip stitch to help us identify where to work the first single crochet of the next round. Go ahead and turn your work, and round 2 is complete. At the end of round 2, you should have the same number of stitches that you had at the end of round 1. And you can continue repeating round 2 to create your Trinity Stitch fabric. The same stitch placement principles we discussed in the rose tutorial apply when working in the round as well. Let's take a closer look. Each single crochet 3 together cluster is worked across the same sequence of stitches: the chain from the previous stitch, the next single crochet 3 together, and the next chain. Because the stitches overlap, maintaining the correct stitch placement is essential. Missing a stitch, accidentally working a single crochet 2 together instead of a single crochet 3 together, or forgetting a chain 1 can cause the stitch pattern to become misaligned. To identify where the next stitch will go, remember that the first loop is always drawn up in the same chain as the last stitch worked. The second loop is drawn up in the next stitch, which is often slightly larger and looser than the chains on either side. The third loop is always drawn up in the following chain. Once you recognize this sequence, finding the correct stitch placement becomes much easier. And just as when working in rows, it's helpful to check your work regularly. Misplaced stitches often create a visible line of holes or gaps in the fabric. If you notice a line of holes forming, check that each single crochet 3 together is worked across all 3 required stitches and followed by a chain 1. Here's another example where the stitches have become misaligned. Instead of alternating across the fabric like this, the Trinity Stitch clusters are stacked directly on top of one another, creating vertical columns with large holes between them. If your work begins to look like this, it's usually a sign that the stitches are being worked in the wrong order. Rather than working into the next chain, the stitch has been worked into the next single crochet 3 together, followed by the chain 1 and the next single crochet 3 together. Because Trinity Stitch relies on proper stitch placement to maintain its distinctive texture and alignment, this small mistake becomes more noticeable with each round. The good news is that it's an easy fix if you catch it early. If you notice the clusters beginning to stack into columns or large holes appearing in the fabric, undo your work back to the last round that looked correct. Then double check your stitch placement before continuing. This is one reason I recommend checking your work regularly as you crochet. Catching a misaligned stitch early can save you a lot of time and frustration later on. I hope you enjoyed learning how to work Trinity Stitch in the round and that you use it to make lots of cozy and beautiful projects. What will you make first? I'd love to hear your ideas. I'll be expanding this Trinity Stitch series over time as new patterns are released. If there are specific aspects of the stitch you'd like to see next, whether that's troubleshooting, how to use it in different types of projects, or its many variations, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, happy stitching! Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more crochet techniques, tips, and tutorials, and check out the links in the video notes for more ways to find me and my patterns.